Trinity Theater in Hollywood, and our third day of the new Urbanism Film Festival. And now please welcome the co-creators and co-directors of the festival, Joshua Padgett and Joel Karahanian.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm Josh Padgett. This is Joel Karahanian.
Yeah. I guess he talks to me. Yeah. Go on.
Thank you for coming out to the festival. We came up with this because we were part of a book group, and we read James Howard Kunstler's The Geography of Nowhere. I don't know if you've read it, but I highly recommend it. In fact, I enjoyed it so much, we enjoyed it so much that we recommended to the book group that we read our next book should be the sequel, Home from Nowhere. And when we recommended that book as our next book, they kicked us out. A little too into the urban planning, back up. So we took the invitation and started our own book group called Noodles and Urbanism. And we started reading all these planning books, and we got really inspired about community and how that's shaped by the built environment. And we started producing events, poetry nights, creative arts nights, bike rides, and
Pastry walks.
the pastry walk. We had one this morning, and it's just a walking tour of local bakeries. And we just sampled a whole bunch of pastries right here on the bread. So just things to get people out and talking about the city and how it influences us. And that's from the film festival.
Yes. And then we came up with this idea for a film festival and went out to the Congress for New Urbanism this last year and talked to some people about it and generated a lot of interest. And here we are, standing in front of you, watching tons of amazing films from all over the world. We just had a workshop with a guy from the Vancouver Cycle Chic movement. We've got people here from Buffalo, people here from Washington State, and Los Angeles. So we're very excited to have Colin Marshall here to do a live podcast for us of his show, Notebook on Cities and Culture. And his guest is CNU Communications Director, Tim Halbur. So I'd like to welcome them.
Yeah, welcome Colin Marshall to the stage. Thank you so much. Let's have a seat real quick.
Which seat should I take?
Well, we'll let you have both. Have the couch.
Okay.
And
How's
then,
this Zoom doing? This is recording? Oh, cool.
We're doing
Speak
good.
both to you guys and into the mic there.
We've got it. So tell us about Notebook on Cities and Culture. Just real quick. It's a podcast.
It's a podcast, hour-long interviews in depth with cultural creators, internationalists, and observers of the urban scene. As I say on each show I go to, I just came back from Copenhagen, recording interviews there. Talked to the famed Jan Gehl, some of his disciples as well, spiritual and literal, and bloggers, filmmakers, a leader of a radical friendliness movement. So it's about cities, but it's also about the work people do in those cities and the personalities they have. And I've taken it to Mexico City, Kyoto, Osaka, Vancouver, Portland, San Francisco, London in January. So I'm going all over the place, but half the interviews are right here in Los Angeles. It's a rich place, as you know. It's you dig a little bit, you find a lot.
What's after some digging, what's the most profound thing that you've learned? You do a lot of research going into the podcast, but you must learn a lot from these hour-long interviews.
Well, you can talk to anybody for an hour. That's what I've learned. People have the question, how do you talk? It reveals more about humanity, I think, than anything else. They say, how can you talk to a lot of people? How can you talk to them for that amount of time? But everybody's got a lot to say, I think. I mean, especially if you frame it in terms of place. This is what I've learned. People like to talk about the place they're in, the places they've been. That's kind of a universal key, conversationally. You always ask, where are you from, right?
Right.
When you're here especially. Everybody's from somewhere else.
That's
and the
right.
ones who are born here want to get out. So where do you want to go also works.
Yeah, coming and going, you get them both ways.
Indeed.
So what, you've been doing this how long?
Podcasting in various forms since 2007. So what is that, 6 years? 6 years now? Used to be a public radio show out of Santa Barbara called The Marketplace of Ideas. Now it's been a good 2 years with this show.
Well, that's great. And you also do some other writing about the city.
Right, I do have a book in the works, Los Angeles Primer, it's called, getting serialized on KCET's Departures website. And that's 2 years from now that'll be available maybe. It's still getting done.
People can read segments of it, though.
KCET.org, or if you search KCET Los Angeles Primer, or colinmarshall.org is the website where this all converges. Same thing, converges then congeals.
Yeah, it's a big city. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of mess here, as people would say, whether you're looking at
Could say that.
highways or the built environment or any kind of many social issues. New Urbanism is about remaking the city and solving all those problems.
This is where it's happening. The
That's
urbanists
the
I interview all around the world, they're talking about Los Angeles too. They're looking here. They know things. Their eyes are on us.
Wow, a child shall lead them.
Uh-huh.
The youngest of
We're
cities.
the children.
We are.
Let's lead them.
So the New Urbanism movement is about remaking cities, and we have a guest for you to interview, and we're excited to have you interview him as part of the New Urbanism Film Festival, Tim Halbur.
All right, let's bring him on.
So Tim, please come onto the stage, and Colin will change the seat.
Switch chairs.
You'll regret that soon enough.
Welcome.
Tim, thank you.
It is Notebook on Cities and Culture. I'm Colin Marshall, coming to you live from the New Urbanism Film Festival in Los Angeles' famous Acme Comedy Theater. I'm here speaking with Tim Halbur. He is the communications director for the Congress for the New Urbanism. He was the managing editor of Planetizen, a website some of you have probably read, probably still read, located in Koreatown, by the way. Didn't know that before, but in my neighborhood of Koreatown, in the Radio Korea building, that's where Planetizen operates out of. He's also done a few other fascinating things, urbanism-wise. You've put together that 2-disc DVD set, The Story of Sprawl, which is a story we all get curious about here. And you've written the only modern children's book about urban planning.
That's right, yes.
Yes, Where Things Are, From Near to Far. We'll talk about all this stuff. But tell me first, Tim, we had some beers before this.
Yes.
You mentioned you became interested in urbanism when you moved to San Francisco. And tell me, being somebody who loves San Francisco, who was brought into the fold by San Francisco, tell me about the indoctrination against Los Angeles you had. What was the indoctrination like?
Right, yes. Well, as a Northern Californian, you are very quickly taught, and particularly actually even farther, in Santa Rosa where I'm from the North Bay, it's even worse, where you're taught that LA is vapid, and it's the people here are too sun-bleached, and they're all involved in the industry, and it's all about appearance. And so the Northern California identity is very tightly wound up with that idea that, you
We're
have
the
to face
opposite of
yourself.
that.
Yes,
We're the
exactly.
opposite of Los Angeles.
We don't care about appearance and all that
Yes.
stuff.
Exactly. But the perceptions are, is there a correct perception among them? Is there, no smoke without fire? What are they building from when they have these ideas about what's wrong with Los Angeles? What are they right about?
Well, I think you're right. When you get down to it, what it is, it's about a lack of a sense of place. And many visitors to Los Angeles have a hard time understanding what it is. Where does Los Angeles end? And what is the place called Los Angeles? And what's it made of? What are the neighborhoods? And besides, the identifying factor of Hollywood and Highland and this kind of, the Grauman's Chinese Theater, the Walk of Fame. A lot of people think of that, and they think there's a beach that they saw on Baywatch. And those are their two nodes of connection to the city. And what that misses, of course, is all of these wonderful neighborhoods in between.
It misses every wonderful neighborhood. I mean, if Hollywood and Highland is your representation, you're not doing very well.
Yeah.
Tell me, there's this phenomenon where people live in Los Angeles for a while, they move away, they say, I hated it, it was so bad. They'll go on and on, they'll damn it from every angle. And you'll ask, what part of Los Angeles did you live in? What was this terrible neighborhood? No, it's Chatsworth. Or, Deep Valley, Deep Orange County.
Yeah.
Why do people feel comfortable calling places 30 miles away from Los Angeles, Los Angeles? I mean, if we did this with New York, we'd say, I hated New York. Oh, it was the worst place. That's the worst place ever. Where'd you live? In Parsippany, New Jersey. Why that? Why this behavior?
Well, I think it's partly the physical landscape is it spreads out as far as the eye can see. You come in an airplane and you can see that grid that just kind of stretches out for miles and miles. And so, and the perception that a freeway will get you places.
Right.
You know, there's these freeways you can go from place to place. And no,
20 minutes to everywhere, I've heard.
Right, except it isn't anymore.
It was a film strip from 1962, though.
Right. And, you know, there are cities where that continues to be true. So if you come from, say, Milwaukee, and you live on a freeway, you can get a long distance from where you live in the suburban community to downtown pretty quickly. There's not much going on. You know, there's more going on now than there used to be. But I think that's partly why that perception is antiquated, is people are still invested in this American idea that you can live outside of the city and get around and experience, still work in various places. And LA is so spread out. If people have told me that a lot. They'll say they'll live in the valley and they'll be commuting to somewhere downtown or to work in the studios or wherever they work. They're in their cars for an hour every day, and of course that's going to color your perception.
People will say, you bring up you live in Los Angeles, and they'll say, they'll assume it's this smog-choked nadir of these ideas of planning where everything went wrong, with that sense of you could get everywhere on a freeway, you can build a spread out as far as possible. They think of it as a city built for the car in the worst possible way.
Yes.
But, I mean, have they not been to Dallas or Phoenix? Or, you know, you can look at the map and see cities that were actually built for the car. You can see that on the map. So why does Los Angeles, a city that really wasn't built for the car, why is it thought of that way?
It's a good question. I'm sure film and popular culture around film has made that a deeply ingrained image. You know, we had the muscle car kind of thing that was big here. I think it's true that, you know, Atlanta, if you were looking for a king or queen of sprawl, Atlanta would be the city that you would have to look at.
Why are they hating on Atlanta then?
Yeah, well, probably in that half of the country they are.
Oh, sure.
And so we're from LA, so we hear it and are sensitive to it.
Right.
But it's true. You know, we loom large in popular culture because this is where movies and film and, you know, it's where TV is made. So
right.
I think that portrayal has helped spread that idea.
You came here for work with Planetism, as I said, headquartered in Koreatown.
Yeah.
You had experience in San Francisco and Oakland. You had known their types of urbanism. So tell me your reaction to Los Angeles when you came here. What kind of a city did you find it? The process of understanding how to use this city, because if you don't go through that process, you're not going to have a good time here. You're going to be one of those people. You know, those people. I hated it. Never going back. I lived in Chatsworth.
Yeah, well, you know, I had my urban planning indoctrination. I had gotten my master's fairly recently before moving. And so I knew enough to think, okay, I want to live near where I work.
Right.
And my one anchor on the city was the Fairfax Farmers Market, which I had been there several times. And to me, that was the place that had the kind of lively urbanism and character and sense of place that I craved.
Right.
So I thought, as long as I'm near that, and that my commute to work can be on surface streets and not too heinous,
It's going to be okay.
it's going to be okay. So, and that has proven to be true. I mean,
Right.
the middle of the city around LACMA and the tar pits, the mid-Wilshire area where I live, has turned out to, you know, has many issues.
Sure.
But also has many pockets of really excellent urbanism.
You talk about the farmers market, and it's not a surprise that was something to hang on to, because it's a phenomenon I've noticed. I mean, I like the farmers market. I think everybody does. There's not a farmers market hater among us. And anybody can shout out if they have objections to what we say here. If there is, in fact, a farmers market hater. We're an intimate crowd, so please shout. But it's also, in its way, I say this in the most farmers market appreciative way, kind of a tourist trap.
Yes.
And even more so the Grove behind it, which I think as many lovers as the farmers market has, the Grove has haters. And I was thinking of recently Olvera Street. I was writing about that for the book. And it's an irritating fact about Los Angeles is that our tourist traps get the urbanism right, especially in terms of scale, in a way that our city so often fails to. Why is that?
I think Partly it's because there's been a growing understanding of these issues, and so the tourist traps, well, Olvera Street's been there a long time, but as far as the Grove, the people who developed the Grove already knew that this kind of Disneyfied version, but that kind of urbanism was something that people craved. And
whose qualities are what?
Whose qualities?
The qualities of this urbanism. Its qualities are what? What is this urbanism people are craving?
Well, it's walkable places.
Right.
It's places that have a mix of uses, so that that people live above. That's false in terms of the Grove. It's a recreation.
You wouldn't want to live in the Grove.
No, you wouldn't.
Somebody would buy.
Somebody would. Somebody would live
They
there.
got to do that.
Yeah.
Money on the table.
Yeah.
Rick Caruso.
Yeah, well, I mean, and there's a false sense of the fact that people live above the stores in that development. But it's retrofitting a certain infrastructure. Costs a lot of money, and it takes time. So there are plenty of places in LA that do have that sense of the stuff that people crave.
What's your list? What are the places you recommend for the urbanist in Los Angeles, other than the farmer's market?
Well, 3rd Street. I spend a lot of time on
Santa
3rd
Monica?
Street. No, actually here. I don't like 3rd Street in Santa Monica.
I was going to say.
Even though it's very popular.
Yeah.
3rd Street here and Beverly both actually have a lot of fine-grained little shops and restaurants that are pleasant to be in. Like Jones on 3rd has a whole culture around it. Abbot Kinney is an experience of its own, certainly. Whether you find it too hipster an experience or too expensive an experience now. It has a fascinating kind of subculture going on there. And downtown, I have to admit, I'm only just starting to touch on and embrace spending so much time in the middle of town. I'm still only getting over to downtown, but I've spent a lot of time in the Arts District, and I think the Arts District is a comfortable. It reminds me a lot actually of Oakland. A lot of the qualities in Oakland that I like.
I want to know a little bit about the journey that got you to Oakland, because you mentioned growing up in Santa Rosa, getting tired of it. As a kid, I think most of us who had this experience of growing up in a suburb, you get to 18, how are you feeling? How are you feeling about this place you grew up in?
Yeah. Actually, my dad worked for Hugh Cotting, who basically owns most of Santa Rosa. He's like the major developer. So about a third of what happened in Santa Rosa came about because of his development. And Cotting Town is his shopping center in town. And my dad worked in Cotting's office right there in Cotting Town. And Hugh was kind of this very Ernest Hemingway character. I'd go to his office, and there were animal skins and like zebra heads on the wall over the walls. From all
they don't make them like him anymore.
They really don't. And so I got a really suburban experience of watching that shopping center and how it related to the suburban community around it.
How did it relate to the community?
Not very well.
They rarely do.
Yeah, I mean, as usual, you had to drive to it, and you had to park. And it had that problem that we talk about in CNU a lot, where in order to get anywhere from the suburban community, you have to get out to the main arterial, and that arterial feeds to the freeway and to anything else that you would need to do. So everybody ends up, the traffic gets much worse than you would in a standard kind of grid city format, because everybody has to go out and take this one main road to get anywhere.
It all bottlenecks them together. But I think this is a question we could do well to spend more time on. I don't know if you felt this growing up, but I certainly did in a suburb, sort of the driving around lifestyle. I didn't really know any better. So what do you say to... You have this feeling of vague unease when you're living in a suburb like that, and having to drive around everywhere. But how do you explain to somebody like that who doesn't know there is any other way to live? This is especially common in America. What do you tell them they're missing?
Right. Well, and we're hesitant to tell people that that's our way of city living is the best way. And it's not the only way. What I often say is that there's a scale. That there will always be people who want a quieter, safer sort of, even though that perception of safety does not prove to be true. That if you actually look at crime statistics, often, today at least, cities and suburbs are almost, it's an equal footing for crime. But we're not trying to tell people, there are people like Joel Kotkin who will
Right.
say, you're trying to put everybody into these, Glenn Beck too, everybody's being forced by urbanists into high rises, and they're going to, it's become this socialist experiment.
Oh my.
And that's just not true. What has happened over the past 60 years is that the development that has happened has been on the suburban scale. We've been developing skyscrapers downtown and then just this flat level of suburbs spreading out as far as the eye can see, because that's a model of what we learned how to do. After World War II, it became this mechanized system of home building that was very profitable and sold this way of life that was this comfortable, you can drive anywhere you want, and you have this freedom on wheels sort of lifestyle. And that's proven to be a false bill of goods.
When did the cracks start appearing in that
That's
grand
fascinating.
backdrop?
In the story of sprawl research I did when I was finding all of those.
This is the 2-disc DVD set.
Yeah. I found it's actually a lot earlier than you think. The critics started popping up almost in the late 50s, early 60s.
Right. I mean, we have Jane Jacobs,
Yeah.
The Life and Death of Great American Cities in
Yeah.
61, but before that,
Yeah,
it
Louis
was even
Mumford
happening. I see.
was already writing on this. They were already seeing the damage done to the inner city, and then the problem was already starting to happen, where this promise that everybody's going to be able to drive their car quickly from place to place was already starting to become a false promise.
What didn't the inventors, the sellers of that dream, take into consideration?
I don't, it's a good question. I think
Or did they just not care?
it's almost the popularity of it
I see.
wasn't what they took into consideration, and the cost of that infrastructure. That infrastructure cost was subsidized for so long and it's still a lot on the books today. You're basically encouraged by the federal government to invest in a single-family home because the product of multifamily housing, of apartment buildings, is still kind of stigmatized by the federal government. You're right. Going back, I felt that unease of living in the suburbs and not really understanding where that came from until much later.
And San Francisco taught you what when you got there? What were you experiencing that opened your eyes?
Well, I lived in several neighborhoods around San Francisco, and the convenience of sort of the corner store and that sense of place, like the design of San Francisco is cohesive and has a character, and so you feel like you're in a place that has a meaning. But on that basic level there was a corner coffee shop that I would go hang out at, and I made friends there, and
Right.
I made connections there, and it became a place that I could send people to meet, or as Jane Jacobs said in Death and Life of Great American Cities, that you have a place where you can, say, leave a key.
Right.
Or,
Your third place.
yeah,
Yes. Not home, not work.
right.
But when you live the separated lifestyle, the suburban separation of functions lifestyle, this is the first thing to go. It's a place that isn't home or work.
Yes.
School.
Yeah. Yeah, so experiencing that, that was kind of what opened my eyes. And then, a trip to Europe, my first trip to Rome, for me in particular, in Italy, was really eye-opening about public space and the meaning and character and the connections and just the experience of being in public
I see.
in a way that supports life and supports people being able to watch each other and learn from each other.
You realized antiquity knew this better than we did, at least at that time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, was it a straight shot to the urban planning and urban planning related professions for you? I mean, from that point on, when you experienced San Francisco and Rome, did you know this was what you were going to focus your attentions on, intellectually and professionally?
No, this is the second career for me.
What's the first one?
It was audio production. I went into radio, producing audio tours for museums for a long time, which gave me kind of another interesting experience of space, having headphones on and giving people directions and giving people an experience in that way.
What are the do's and don'ts of audio tours?
There are a lot. The main one is to try not to tell people what to think and feel.
Right.
And
that's a big problem with audio tours, as I find.
Yeah. So giving people the information that's really interesting and the stories,
right,
and hearing directly from people who are interesting people to talk to about those
right,
items. But trying not to be didactic and telling people that the example I always thought of, I remember one tour I took where there was an intersection of streets in it, and someone said it was symbolic of Christ and the cross. And it was said in that way. This is symbolic of Christ and the cross. And I was like, who are you to tell me that? I really don't think that was the intention.
I see. Well, let's draw a line here. I mean, in cities, you don't want a city that lays it all out for you clearly. This is what you do here, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
What do you want? You want something more ambiguous, not maybe totally unusable. Maybe Los Angeles errs a bit too far on the side of being difficult to figure out.
Right.
If Los Angeles were a museum exhibit, how would you do the audio tour? Tell me that.
Well, I would start by making it a series of audio tours.
Right.
It would not be one.
There is no one story.
There is no one story.
If you look for one story or one way, you're like the European tourists who sometimes stop me on the street and say, "Where's the center?"
Yes.
And I'm like, "We've got an hour because I'll explain to you how the city works."
Yeah.
They never do have the hour.
Yeah. So I would definitely break it up.
Right.
And have different areas.
Break it up by how? By neighborhoods? By dimensions? Which way are you dividing this audio tour, hypothetically?
If I were to dig into it, I would probably work with subcultures rather than places. I think it would be interesting to follow paths of, say, the Persians
Sure.
in the west side of town, and little Tehran. There's a section over there that's tarantulous. That's what it's called.
If you know this stuff, shout it out. Please. We need all the help we can get.
So I think it would be fascinating to dig in. Like one of the best audio tours I worked on was a tour of New York's Chinatown.
Oh.
And trying to get beyond the drug opium war kind of story that people told of it, and interview the people who lived there and tell the real story of how they related. And I discovered that there was a really interesting culture of people from, where was it? There's a brand new influx of immigrants from another part of China than from where, Guangzhou? I forget. But that intersection was causing a really interesting rift and dynamic in New York's Chinatown. And there's so much of that happening here in LA all the time.
Right.
Because there's a really lively, dynamic immigrant culture. There's people coming in all the time. You look at San Gabriel, and this fascinating, which Jonathan Gold exposed through food. But there's this fascinating influx of all these Chinese cultures, creating a brand new American Chinese culture that is both rooted in the ability to have traditional foods from all kinds of regions of China, but then also their young offspring are starting food trucks, which have fusion tacos of the Szechuan food that they grew up with,
Making me hungry.
Oh,
God. Tell me, are the subcultures all immigrant cultures? Is that what you mean by subcultures?
No, I don't think necessarily. I think there's certainly an artist subculture that's fascinating, and traditionally that's been fueled by both CalArts and the people who have worked in the behind-the-scenes part of the business. So you have the people who are the set painters, who have built the set for friends, and then in their spare time they're doing really fascinating, unusual art. So I think those two scenes have created really interesting paths through the city as well that are not necessarily as visible I mean, you've got the galleries in Culver City, and you have galleries that pop up and open studios across the city. But there's definitely exciting art going on for that very same kind of reason, that there's this influx of energy and dynamics from people working a lot in their spare time and having different influences that are colliding here all the time.
I ask you this, Tim Halbur of the Congress for the New Urbanism. Is Los Angeles too big?
Yes, I would say yes.
How big is too big?
I mean, the way it is too big is that I think we're always attempting to define it and as one thing, and we're always trying to connect it. And it is a city of many centers and many cultures, and it's just big. So if we had more physical barriers, I mean, it would be a little more obvious.
We've got the ocean.
Yes,
that's not enough.
There's a hard stop at the ocean, but the hills haven't stopped us from from having the valley be considered part of Los Angeles. So yeah, I'll go out on a limb and I'll say it's too big.
What does the Congress for New Urbanism do? For those who don't know, what is your mission there?
Well, you have to go back to the founding story really briefly in order to tell that story, because there were a collection of urban thinkers, really smart leaders in urbanism, who came together, architects, planners, people from different sides, who in 1993 had what we call a Congress, which is like a conference.
Right.
And they wrote a manifesto, and it's called the Charter of the New Urbanism. And it's fairly, it's written to be something that we could all agree with in many ways. It's hard to refute the logic and both the common sense of it. It's very apolitical in many ways. But what it says in the preamble is that the problems of placeless sprawl, disinvestment in central cities, environmental degradation, these are all interconnected problems that are a problem of community building principles. That you can take an approach to all three of those, that many of the problems that we face are all kind of part of one solution. And that solution is to think about scale, to build places that are walkable and connected, and are thoughtful in many ways. And you then end up solving, I mean, like the recent connection that people have been made is to health. Over the last several years, the connection has been about obesity, and health is a problem of people being able to walk some places in their lives. Just the daily walking, even if it's just a few blocks down to the store or around your neighborhood, that makes the difference in a lot of public health issues. So creating places where people want to go down the street and are free to bike or walk to at least a few of the things that they need to do in their lives makes a huge difference.
So this sounds simple. What gets in the way? Why can't we make more of these places? Why don't we have more already? We'll say that.
Right. Well, it's very much about the urban planning of the 40s to the early 40s and 50s, when the car was becoming more ubiquitous. We were building this suburban sprawl, suburban homes as far as the eye can see, and so everything became sort of specialized, for one, because we'd separated out all our uses. But then it was very much about transportation planning, being about moving cars around as quickly as possible. So we carved out our cities to make parking lots and to make big freeways that would cut through neighborhoods, and the streets to have big rounded corners that we can quickly move our cars through. And that made our environments a lot less safe for pedestrians and a lot less accessible for people to walk around. And that then broke a lot of the connections that people had, the social and economic connections that people had in their neighborhoods. So, yeah, it caused a lot of disinvestment and a sense of a lack of place.
What does it emblematize that at 1100 Wilshire we have a building with 15 stories of pure parking with a thin blade of skyscraper on top that is just a brown wall on the street level? Is that as low as we got as far as planning goes in development?
There's plenty like that, plenty worse.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think so.
What does it take to clear away that stuff? What does it take to new urbanize a city like Los Angeles?
You know, we were talking earlier about Jan Gehl talking about acupuncture.
Yes, that's as he refers to. I was recently at Jan Gehl's office in Copenhagen. He refers to, yes, the improvements made in Los Angeles so far is acupuncture. But
yeah, and I think the lesson of...
I don't think he believes in acupuncture, by the way. That doesn't mean it's effective.
Right. But I think urban acupuncture can be effective, and infill in particular.
Mm-hmm. Meaning what?
Meaning, rather than trying to solve all the problems by building a brand new utopia,
right,
like taking some empty land and trying to build, and this was something that the new urbanists got criticized for early on, is to build it only in a green field, that you've now created this brand new perfect utopia, but then that often can have a sense of Disneyfication.
As utopias do.
A sense of falseness and lack of authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
And whereas Los Angeles actually has a lot of authenticity, and the problems are more a sense of, okay, let's take this empty lot and turn it, that's very prominent, and turn it into a place that people want to be, and people want to live. And if we went in and put in street trees here, and put in some benches along this corner, and put in a cafe over here, we gave some incentives to have an art center and some businesses over here that would be attractive to people to hang out in. People are kind of simple, you know. But when you get down to it, the behavior of people is not that complicated. They want to sit in a cafe on the street and have the sun shining on them and be able to converse with a friend and have a good meal, a cup of coffee, a beer.
But why did we forget that here and in so many other cities? I don't want to beat up on Los Angeles because this is better than many cities. Let's not forget in terms of that alone, in terms of the simple things.
Yeah.
So what did we? That seems like a part of our nature we wouldn't forget. We like to go out and drink a coffee.
You'd think that.
In the sun.
I don't know why we forgot that. I think we got carried away by this vision of the future. Have you seen Magic Highway USA?
I've not seen Magic Highway USA.
It is a half-hour Disney cartoon short about the coming future, and it's very Jetsons. You know, the guy actually steps in his home into one of those cars with the big glass dome
bubble over him,
and he shoots along a monorail that no one is driving on.
Sure.
And he drives into his office. He steps out of the car into his office and over to his desk. I don't think he even walks to his desk.
Right.
I think his chair goes on a little rail immediately to his desk.
Future's now.
And so I think a lot of forces in that time painted the picture of progress.
Right.
And
that's complete isolation. Complete and total isolation. That's progress.
Yeah.
That guy didn't get panhandled along the way, though, did he? He didn't get tuberculosis.
That's right.
He didn't get. He didn't smell a stockyard.
Yeah.
These people were thinking about these things, though. I'm not even really joking.
I mean, and this is again with the story of Sprawl. I felt like I found some films that showed me. Oh, I see why the city was stigmatized.
Right.
You know, there was a period.
It's where poor people breed on you.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And at the time, it was there was fear of tuberculosis.
Right.
I mean, it wasn't necessarily density that was causing that problem,
right.
but cities were full of industrial pollution, and there was kind of chaos. There were issues of sanitation and things that we then solved pretty quickly, but they managed to ingrain in us this idea that we would be able to breathe more, we'd be healthier if we were either living in a skyscraper with a big park around us, or we were living out in this idyllic kind of suburban cottage.
And never moved our bodies.
Yes.
That's the most important part. That's going to bring us health. You mentioned this Disney cartoon and the word Disneyfication. I don't want to put the Disney concept down yet, because there was a quote from Ray Bradbury, the famous writer who was a notable non-driving Angelino and a lover of Los Angeles, for a long time. He said in the 60s, I believe, "I'm all for making Walt Disney mayor," and they were friends, "because he's the only man who can get rapid transit here. He can make it entertaining, he can make it fun, he can make transit appealing." Disneyland is, in some ways, irritatingly a proving ground or a place where all of the urbanist concepts that haven't yet been fully implemented in Los Angeles have been. Is it not? You're a Disneyphile. Tell me about the environment of Disneyland, the built environment there. What does it get right?
Well, it gets many things wrong, and I have also learned from working through this obsession with Disneyland. What is it about that place that fascinates me and is interesting? And I do think it, as a pilgrimage, that and Disney World are fascinating places to look at because of how unusual the built environment is and how they create, I mean, really, it's a sense of care. You know, it's a sense of urban design and investment in a place and a thoughtfulness to the places that you're walking, for one, as we said.
Right.
There's only a couple of cars in Disneyland, and they're never going to drive more than half a mile an hour.
True, true.
So to me, it's that. You know, the main street of Disneyland has stores that are right on the main esplanade, and you're allowed to walk freely, and so there's a sense of safety and a sense of that you're someplace that people can walk and see each other and hang out in.
Tell me some of the hard, concrete qualities of Disneyland we could learn from in Los Angeles. How can Los Angeles imitate Disneyland in a way that is not Disney-fied? You know, what's a lesson we can draw? Because everybody here has been to Disneyland, I'm sure.
Right.
What do you see there? Especially you, as a Disney-loving urbanist. What do you see that makes you think that is a real principle we can just take and implement elsewhere, Los Angeles or anywhere else?
Right. Well, not to get overly simple, and to back up, actually, the thing that I always have actually really loved about Disneyland is the experience that you go somewhere completely separate, where you don't know where you are anymore.
Right.
You go into Pirates of the Caribbean, you've gone somewhere magical because the sky is actually a ceiling, but you have no idea where you have gone, and that experience of it is what fascinates me about it.
It gives you the unknown in a positive way, not the unknown we fear.
Yes, yeah.
Which is what cities were in 1960, the feared unknown.
Right, yeah. But the basic lessons are those I just spelled out, where it's a walkable place. There's a corn dog stand right there.
Every city needs a corn dog
It's
stand.
not that complex.
Right.
You know, it's a place that you, which unfortunately now is so crowded that it is an unpleasant place to be.
Ah.
So I guess it's sort of the suburban experience all over again.
What are tickets now, $90?
Yeah, 92. I was there a couple of weeks ago, actually. So
You probably have a season pass, though, right?
I do not. No, I don't get there that frequently. Once or twice a year is my limit.
Now, this sense of, we have an Olvera Street, we have Disneyland, we have the Grove, we have these very planned environments in and around Los Angeles. We have environments that feel completely unplanned within the city itself. There are dissatisfactions on both ends of the spectrum. What is the task here? When does an environment get too planned? What's a sign someplace has been too planned? What's a sign someplace is heading toward groviness, the technical term groviness, which I will now introduce?
Well, I think it actually is fairly rare that a place heads there. I think it's often plunked down.
Oh, it begins
whole
that way.
plot.
That's the nature of it.
Yeah. That what you pick up and that sense of lack of authenticity and character only comes from something that's just plopped whole cloth.
Right.
Neighborhoods can certainly, as Abbot Kinney Boulevard is becoming, and is people. I read an article recently where people were complaining about the fact that it was getting too expensive and starting to lose the character that it had.
Right.
That is something that can be hard to control and embrace. But cities are dynamic, as we were saying earlier. I think the lesson of cities is if they're not if they're not always changing or growing or gentrifying or becoming more expensive, or people are moving in different ways, in fluxes across the city, then you're stagnant, and then it becomes a place that people don't want to be.
A living city is a constantly changing city.
Yes.
In every way. Now, San Francisco, the city you love, is one of the cities you love, is an illustration of a city that tried its damnedest to not change.
Yes.
The results have been, I would say, unhappy. What would you say?
Well, Gabe Metcalf, who is the head of SPUR, it's the group in San Francisco that advocates for good urbanism in the city, recently wrote a very insightful essay about this, saying that the very thing that has preserved the character of San Francisco, the groups that have fought for historic preservation and not growing in many ways, is responsible for making it a wonderful place and at the same time making it unaffordable. And
Just as Disneyland is now $100 to get in.
that's right, and super crowded.
Yes, San Francisco has reached those levels as well.
Yeah. So I think San Francisco has some room, and as he was calling for, in areas to learn that lesson. And I think it also, San Francisco, at the risk of being controversial, I think the environmental movement in the Bay Area has taken, unfortunately, the lesson that no growth is the best growth. That humans are bad. And so humans should not be, we should not be investing in a built environment. No growth is better. So whereas the lessons that urbanists have learned in CNU is that concentrating people is actually much better for the environment than spreading them out across the landscape.
Energy usage is quite a bit lower when you're sharing a lot of resources, or when you're in to use the example of house versus one building with 100 occupants.
Yeah,
There's hard numbers on this. I'm just gesturing, but you have the numbers.
Yeah, the number I always quote is that the average New York resident uses 1/4 the energy of what the average Dallas resident uses, because they are more apt to take public transportation. The steam heat of the apartment underneath you helps keep you warm in the winter. So yes, the built environment of a denser living situation is more beneficial for the greater environment than us spreading concrete and asphalt across the country and having to string power lines and telephone lines and everything, sewers, across to people living in suburban communities.
Why did it become important to you to write a book on urban planning for little kids? Why did they need to know how a sewer works, for example?
That was actually spurred by my boss at the time at Plan Edison,
I see.
Chris Steins. He has twin boys, and they were both 3 at the time. So he came to me and said, let's write this book because I want my kids to be able to tell people what I'm interested in, what I do.
Right.
And it took me a while to think, okay, what can a little kid grasp about this kind of fairly complex idea about how cities work and this interrelatedness of all these issues. And I decided to kind of base it on the transect, which is a somewhat complex idea, but it's the new urbanist theory it's really about the scale issue. It's about breaking down an urban environment into 6 segments. And that that planning for these 6 segments creates this synergy of the metropolitan area that's not, that is, as I said, it creates a scale of uses.
What are these 6?
They are, it's...
Pressure's on.
Well, they're actually only called, and this is very technical, but they're T1 to T6 is what people refer to them as.
Sure.
T1 being the center of densest use, and the T6 being almost like agriculture,
Just
outside
move outward.
the green zone.
So the sort of suburb a lot of people of my generation grew up in America. Which T are we looking at with that?
That's basically T4.
T4.
Yeah,
Okay.
and actually I would qualify
Only
that
2 from farmland. Oh, jeez.
because there are
Close to the soil.
This is where Joel Kotkin always wins his argument.
And Joel Kotkin, to explain those who don't know,
Yes.
he writes a lot of books about, I read interviews and he's not quite, he gets demonized by a lot of urbanists, but he's also into jabbing at them a bit, saying, look, people live in suburbs, people want suburbs.
Yeah.
So he's a bit of a, as we would say on the net, a troll, but also he's probably not, he reflects something real, you know, but...
Yes, yeah, I mean, there are going to always be people who want to live in suburbs.
Right.
I think what he does, that I've seen, is he trumps his numbers
Ah,
by including inner ring suburbs, which are actually very urban, and much of LA is built of a lot of inner ring suburbs.
what's an inner ring suburb here? What would be an example of an inner ring suburb in Los Angeles?
Well, pretty much the entire middle swath from the 10 to the 405.
Oh, okay. You get out of downtown, you get to the 405, you're in an inner ring suburb.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Yeah,
Even though
pretty
it's
much.
Los Angeles.
It's no longer, I mean, all of our terms are
It might
based
be Culver
around
City, I don't
this
know.
hub and spoke idea that
Right.
you have a downtown, and we kind of blew that model. We don't have the Chicago model of a dense downtown that radiates out.
Right.
So that's the idea, is that you have this ring of suburban community. That I was just in Buffalo, where our next Congress is being held, and they have this very solid structure of these beautiful inner ring suburbs
Right.
that connect to their empty downtown.
Sure.
But much of LA actually is based around, like the apartment building I currently live in is that Beverly Hills 90210 model
Oh, boy.
that's kind of U-shaped, that has 2 levels, and it's 12 units. And it's a really nice, historic, dense way of living. It isn't the single-family home on a big, with a big lawn in the back and a big backyard,
Right.
which uses up a lot of space and it's ineffective in terms of infrastructure and making you feel like you're in a place that's connected.
As you say, we don't use the Chicago model here, but you're getting more and more experience with the Chicago model because, well, this man is flying to Chicago every week as part of his job at the CNU. This is your commute, Chicago,
Yes.
on a red eye, every week.
Yep.
Tell me about the experience of experiencing Los Angeles and Chicago, alternating back and forth. 2 very different cities, both American though, both with commonalities. What are you starting to see when you can contrast these just all the time in your life?
Well, one, obviously the weather is a
Yes,
huge
sure.
is a huge issue. I have to pack a big winter coat.
Probably have to buy that
in my bag.
for this job, right?
Yes, yeah.
You didn't own one.
No.
No way.
No, I did not. And I have to leave the loafers at home.
Right.
Except, of course, in the summer when then it's blisteringly hot.
When the loafers are too much in Chicago.
Yes. So so that, of course, is the most stark thing. And then I'm a complete transit user in Chicago.
Right.
I have a rental along the Blue Line, which connects me right to my office and to O'Hare. It's a different way of life, and it is interesting as an urbanist. The transit lifestyle has, we advocate for it, and it can at times feel quite inconvenient. And then I come back to LA and I'm like, oh, I can get in my car and drive somewhere, and it feels very comfortable,
Now, are you purely a driver in Los Angeles right now, or what are your ways of getting around?
I have a bike, which doesn't get as much use as it should. I walk to things pretty frequently. I have a Chihuahua that I walk around with, and so I can get around and solve. I can get to my dry cleaner.
It seems to be sort of a native strategy in Los Angeles for getting some exercise. If you drive everywhere, get a dog.
Yes.
And that may be a key to why dogs are so prevalent. People need to walk.
That's right.
A dog is an excuse.
Yeah.
Is that how it is for you?
I stumbled into having a dog,
I see.
and it wasn't a deliberate strategy, but yes, it does get me out walking around my neighborhood, and it's a nice in Carthay Square, Carthay Circle. It's kind of this, again, a fantasy suburb. It's mostly duplexes and apartment buildings, so it's more dense, but it has this unique LA character of kind of fantasy lighting. It's kind of Spanish and Moorish and tropical. So I do enjoy walking through it.
10 years from now in Los Angeles, what do you want to see changed, ideally? What do you want to see here? What's something in a decade you would like to see have happen, be it with transit, be it with development, be it with laws, be it with anything. You know what needs to change first so other things can change. What would you like to see in a decade?
Well, I would like to see a growing awareness of the neighborhoods and a growing sense of connectivity and place among those neighborhoods.
Now, what does that translate to concretely? If we have a sense of connectivity and place, what do we have? What's different in the feel and the experience of these neighborhoods?
If you think about San Francisco being a place I know, there's the Mission, there's Fisherman's Wharf, there's the Inner Sunset, there's every neighborhood. People know what it's called and how you get there and what you're going to experience when you get there.
Right.
And that creates kind of a more cohesive whole. And I think a lot of what LA has is a lack of recognition of what we have.
Of our neighborhoods?
Yeah. Like I often try to refer to where I live, and I'm at a loss for words because you can say, people refer to it in many different ways. It's Mid-Wilshire. It's, I say it's near the tar pits.
Right.
Because that can often be, or Lackawanna, because those are landmarks that people might know.
But a neighborhood name doesn't necessarily mean anything.
No, but like you can forge through a variety of tactics a sense of place. And whether it's by formal means, by putting in a park or a public square or an amenity that becomes a place that people gather. I think, the subway to the sea will create some nodes along which people can start making a character in a place.
Now, in the audience, we have a former guest on this show, Eric Brightwell, who's drawn many a map of Los Angeles neighborhoods. People like to see his maps, A, because they're cool to look at, but B, because often they're about neighborhoods that they've never heard of before.
Right.
They're neighborhoods they've been around a while. There's maybe some name recognition if you're near the neighborhood, but very often I think people look at his maps and say, I've lived in Los Angeles 50 years, and I've never once heard of this neighborhood. You mentioned a few reasons why that might be. Well, why do we not know what neighborhoods we have? Maybe they don't have certain public amenities. Maybe transit doesn't stop there. But why don't we know? Why couldn't each of us name the majority of the neighborhoods in Los Angeles? Because it's too big.
I guess because it's too big. I mean, there's just a lack of definition. Things flow right into each other. You know a neighborhood by feel when you're there. I'm at Pico and Fairfax, and I go west, and suddenly there's kebab shops, and there are kosher markets, and there are people walking around wearing yarmulkes, and you're like, oh, this place has an identity. This is a Jewish neighborhood, and the character of this place becomes cohesive. And so, and it goes back to Disney, I guess.
Yes.
To me, I think the ways you can often create change and make a place feel like a place you want to be is by theming relatively, almost like on the edge of theming, because you want to maintain authenticity.
Right.
But you want to capture the spirit and the character that is there and enhance it. Put a little salt on it. Create a sense that this is, create more flavor of that space. And there are often underused elements. I mean, this is one thing I learned working with Art Place previously to CNU, is that there are places like this place in, I'm going to forget where it is, North Carolina. There's a small town that this one artist who was this old guy who had been through World War II and was a welder in World War II. And he started, when he got home from the war, he started building these whirligigs, these giant metal constructions with these fan blades on them that had the guy sawing wood and all that. So he
all the extras.
So he spent his time making these fanciful whirligigs, and now that town has embraced him and is building a park in the center of town with his whirligigs as kind of this this marker that this is a place of uniqueness. This is a place that people care about. And it's creating, they've already stirred up some new development in the town and created some new jobs for people, like working with the whirligigs to maintain them and creating a sense of metalworking and all that. Like, The Crucible in Oakland is actually this really fascinating example of that. Are you familiar with the Crucible?
I'm not.
It's an arts organization very much in the Burning Man mode. They participate in Burning Man. They found, they're in an industrial building, and they teach welding and metalwork and this kind of pride and identity around building things with metal and having this very, hardcore, tattooed, Burning Man sort of lifestyle around this kind of artistic investment. And it's created a sense of identity in Oakland that's really strong, that has managed to pervade, people have been like, oh, well, let's take these other unused industrial spaces, and I'm going to create an identity by being a sculptor of large pieces, and I'm going to turn it, make a living off of creating jewelry. And this maker culture has kind of expanded there and created a subculture again that has created an identity and a brand and theming, shall we say, for that place.
It's plenty to learn from. Been speaking here with Tim Halbur. He is the Communications Director at the Congress for the New Urbanism. He has been the Managing Editor of Planetism. Previously that, he's written the children's book on urban planning, Where Things Are from Near to Far. He also put together the 2-DVD set, The Story of Sprawl. Tim, thanks so much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
This is the Notebook on Cities and Culture live at the New Urbanism Film Festival in Los Angeles, California. I've been Colin Marshall. You can keep up with the cultural creators, internationalists, and observers of the urban scene on the show at colinmarshall.org. Thanks. Thank you. And thank you for showing up. This will be podcast as well, so you've heard it first before the audience internationally. I hope you feel suitably lucky. Thank you, guys.